Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Statistics Solutions Chapter 2 webinar. Okay, just a couple things before we get started. Yeah, Sierra right now, our co-host, is posting some important links, links to, us, our site, also where we archive the webinars. So you can find this webinar there. You can also find other webinars that we've given in the past. And I believe everybody gets a copy of the webinar. Okay, so if you have any questions, we're going to have a question and answer session at the end. If you have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat box or the question and answer box, so you don't forget them, but I'll just get to them all at the end. All right. Okay, so the chapter 2, just before we get started on the kind of specifics of the chapter, just kind of pull back and kind of look at the chapters of the the dissertation, how they fit together, and then the overall purpose of the chapter 2, before we kind of get into the the details of what goes into the chapter. So the model we follow is a pretty standard, pretty typical dissertation model, which is 5 chapters, where chapter 1 is the introduction, chapter 2 is literature review, chapter 3 is the methods, where you discuss your methods. And usually the 1 through 3 is called the proposal, right? You haven't conducted the study yet. This is you proposing what you're going to be doing. And then once you get the proposal approved, you go through some internal review board forms you fill out before you can collect data. Then you collect data. Once you get the data, you present the data in chapter 4. And then chapter 5 is where you discuss your findings. Okay, so the chapter 2 is the lit review. And I'm not going to lie, the lit review is tough. It's a tough chapter. It's just the way it is. Now that doesn't mean that it's insurmountable. Obviously, a lot of people do it, and you can too. It's just you kind of have to know what to expect and what the chapter 2 is about. So the literature review, you want to basically you're reviewing and analyzing research on your topic, right? So the idea is not only to provide a context for your study, right? A research context. Here's what people have done that relate to what I'm doing, and it shows us what researchers have done in the past. That might relate to your study, and what might you expect to find based on the findings of previous research. But it also acts in large part as a big argument for conducting your study. In other words, it supports the research problem, right? So part of what you need to do in the lit review is be analytical. We'll talk about this a little later. Bring up the shortcomings of some of the studies, what they covered, what they didn't cover. So that gives us a picture of what researchers have talked about and conducted studies on when your topic, and the things that also shows what they didn't cover. And that you should kind of push that point when you can, because it makes a case for conducting your study. Look, researchers have done this, and this, but they haven't done this other thing, which just happens to be what you're doing. Okay, so overall, the literature review is a review of the research, acts as a research context for your study, but it also kind of makes that argument that, hey, we need a study on this, your study, because here's what researchers have covered, but here's also what they haven't talked about. Okay, that's just kind of the pullback, big picture view of the purpose of the chapter. All right. Okay, this is what we're going to be covering today. Basically the contents of the chapter: introduction, literature search strategy, theoretical framework, the review of the literature, and the summary. The review of the literature section is probably about 80% of the lit review. It's the bulk of the lit review. That's where you're actually analyzing, talking about the studies. And that's always going to be different, right? Because everybody's study is different. It focuses on different things. So the way that's structured, the content of what goes in there, it's always going to be different. All right. So for the introduction, just, like other chapters, the introduction is basically here to reorient your reader, right? So to do that, usually start off by restating the purpose of your study. And you can restate that verbatim, because usually your purpose statement, it doesn't change. It's like your RQs, once it's set, it's set. So restate the purpose of your study. Remind the reader of why your study is needed, why it's important to conduct your study, which is going to sound a lot like your research problem. And if you want, you can preview contents of the chapter. This chapter will include, just list the sections. The introduction is not long. I'd say less than a page, maybe a paragraph, maybe a couple. But I want to stop here and make a point, and you're going to hear me say this a couple of times throughout the webinar. Always, if you haven't already, I'm sure you have, but just to reemphasize the point, get a hold of your school's template for the chapters. If your school doesn't have a template, usually they do. Ask your chair or somebody for an example, or go pull one yourself from ProQuest, which is you can get to through your university library. ProQuest publishes dissertations, but get a dissertation from your school close to what you're doing as an example, right, to see what people have done in some of these sections, how they've handled it. So that's always a good idea. But again, get the template. If your school has one, get the template, because that will tell you exactly what they're looking for as far as sections go and what should go into the sections. Having said that, there's a good deal of standardization across it. But again, some schools they may have minor differences. So, but you always want to look at what your school wants specifically. But again, this will act as a good kind of general template. Okay, that's the introduction, not long. The literature search strategy usually comes next. Sorry, it was tough getting that out. Literature search strategy. Sometimes it's called something else, like methods of searching, but usually there's some kind of section. Sometimes it's folded into the introduction. Sometimes it's a standalone section. That's why it's important to see what your school wants. But basically, this is where you describe your searching process, right? How you located and obtained the material that you found for your lit review. And why this is important is because the lit review, excuse me for a minute, I'll be right back. This will just take me a second. Okay, I'm back. I beg your pardon for that. Okay, the literature search strategy. The lit review needs to be fairly comprehensive, right? That means you need to cast a wide net, right? You need to get as much material as possible on your topic as you can. So that's what they mean by comprehensive. And so what the search strategy tells your reader and tells your professors, it tells you how you search for material, and it displays, how comprehensive you were in your search, right? So it gives them confidence that, yeah, you searched the right databases, you searched several databases, you used the correct key terms to get the material you needed. So it shows them your steps, and it shows them that it convinces them that you've performed a fairly comprehensive search. Usually this section's not too long. so you want to, start off with something about where you searched, right? So, and it's usually going to be your library, your university library, right? You have access, electronic access, online access to your own university database or university library, which you can get into and search databases through that. So, you conducted a comprehensive search through so-and-so university's online library portal, right? List the databases that you searched, and any search tools. Databases, there's databases in every, in business and education and psychology. There's one in education called ERIC. It's an acronym. It stands for something. But any kind of database that is specific to your discipline, you want to make sure you search, right? Or databases. Also, any search tools. Search tools are like Google Scholar, right? It searches multiple databases, all right? And there's other ones, Academic Search Complete, Academic Search Premier. I think there's one called Business Search Premier. These are like mega search tools, right? Where they search lots of databases, they cover lots of ground. So any search tool like that you use, you want to list. Sometimes you have to go to specialized journals, like write to the journal. Sometimes your chair will ask you to, hey, did you look at this journal? If you looked at any specialized journals, you want to list those too. You also want to talk about the key terms that you used for your search, right? And these key terms are not any surprise, right? They're going to align with your variables and your major concepts in your study, right? If you're studying transformational leadership and emotional intelligence, well, those are going to be two of your big search terms. They might also include, your population or your setting. Maybe it's middle managers, and middle managers you would want to include that in your search term too, to get as close to what you're doing as possible. And this last part too is important. You want to talk about any ways that you qualified your search or that you filtered your search. Sometimes, you can specify that you only want to get back articles that are published in English or that are full text. Okay, but these next two are pretty important: data publication and peer-reviewed articles. Okay, so when you're conducting your search, there's filters you can apply. Peer review is very important because the gold standard of what you want to review and the lit review are peer-reviewed articles or peer-reviewed studies, right? So you can include books, but I would include them sparingly. Material from websites, you don't want to review that. You may need to include something from like a .gov website or something about statistics for context or something, but you're not reviewing the material that appears on websites. You're reviewing material that comes from these peer-reviewed journal articles, essentially. So you want to highlight that in your search, you focus predominantly on obtaining peer-reviewed material. All right, that's going to be important. And that just means that before the material is published, it's sent to kind of blind reviewers or judges who are experts in the field. I see I have a question. I'll get to it at the end here. And data publication is important in the sense that, again, look at your template about the specifics about what your school wants. Some schools want really recent material. Some schools, they don't have any kind of stipulations about the age of the material. But I would say most schools have like a 5-year window or a 5 to 10 year window. In other words, they want the material that you review to be published within the last 5 years or so of your anticipated date of graduation. And that's fairly standard because you want the lit review to reflect what's going on in the research, right? So what was going on 20 years ago is probably not relevant, unless it's foundational, unless it's some kind of like really important study. And you can include foundational important studies, but the bulk should be on recent material, right? Because that gives us a snapshot of what's going on in the field now, right? What's going on in the field 15, 20 years ago, it's not that important. Again, unless something for some reason is really foundational. So it's important that if you do have that kind of window that you need to work in, that the more recent window of published material, it's important that you put it in the literature search strategy, that you focus mainly on material that was published within 5 years of when you plan to graduate. So that's an important thing to put in if it's required in this section. Usually, again, the section is not too long, maybe a page, maybe a couple pages at the most. And again, look at examples to see how people have handled this section in the past, but that's kind of the basics of that section. Okay, next, the theoretical framework. Again, check your school's template. Sometimes the theoretical framework goes in the 1 only. Sometimes it only goes in the 2. Sometimes, which is more often the case, you talk a little bit about it in the 1 and then you expand upon it in the 2. Okay, so if your theoretical framework needs to appear in the 2, and you already have it in the 1, it just means it's a little, there's more elaboration on it. So a couple of things here, though. Number 1, what is a theoretical framework, right? Because it's kind of hard to get our heads around sometimes. And 2, there's something called a conceptual framework. And so what's the difference between the theoretical framework and the conceptual framework? Okay. A theoretical framework is basically a theory or theories that kind of frame your research questions and they guide your study, right? And so let's take, we're going to get to conceptual framework in a minute, but let's just take theoretical framework and let's just take a real practical approach, which is what I take to the theoretical and the conceptual framework. And the theoretical framework is typically associated with quantitative studies, and the conceptual framework is typically associated with qualitative studies. Okay, and I think the best way to talk about this is by using examples. Let's say we're conducting a quantitative study on the connection between transformational leadership and emotional intelligence. Okay. So we need a theoretical framework, right? So it should follow as closely to what we're doing as possible. Transformational leadership, emotional intelligence, those are the constructs, those are the variables you're measuring. So your theoretical framework is going to involve theories of transformational leadership and emotional intelligence. I mean, it's kind of that simple, that part of it. Obviously, writing it up is a little different, but so yeah, those would be, those two theories would together would be comprise your theoretical framework. So transformational leadership, emotional intelligence, and you would just say something like the theories of transformational leadership and emotional intelligence will serve as the theoretical framework for the study. And then you would handle each one separately, right? And that would include talking about who developed the theory, the year, what did they develop the theory to explain? Because that's what theories do, they explain things. You want to define you want to define the theory, of course. You want to talk about and define any associated components to the theory. For example, transformational leadership, and I can't remember them now, it has 4 components, right? And these usually, these correspond to things that are being measured. So you're gonna have to define it, and talk about those components. And you want to discuss a little bit what other researchers have used the theory for, how they've used it, okay? And you want to try to connect it to your study, to what you're doing. How does the theory help explain what you're studying, or how does it connect to what you're looking at? Okay, that's the kind of idea with the theoretical framework. And of course, once you're done in our example, talking about transformational leadership theory, you would then move on to the emotional intelligence and talk about that theory and follow the same steps. A note here, we're talking about quantitative studies, we're talking about the theoretical framework. If you're conducting a quantitative study, you're probably using some kind of an instrument or a survey. And you want to make sure that your theory aligns with your instrument. And what I mean by that is, let's take emotional intelligence as an example. Okay, there are several instruments to measure emotional intelligence, right? You're going to select the one that kind of best captures what you want to find out, right? That's more suited for your study. Okay, let's just say you select Goleman. Goleman, he was a major theorist in emotional intelligence. You're going to use Goleman's instrument. Okay, if you're using Goleman's instrument, now all these instruments, they're created from theories, right? They have theoretical bases. They just don't kind of spring from nowhere. So you want your theory and your instrument to align. So if you're using Goleman's instrument, you want to use Goleman's theory in your theoretical framework. You see what I mean? So, I mean, because there's other people's versions of the theory too, like Smith, you know, I'm just thinking off the top of my head here, but Smith may have his own instrument and his kind of version of the EI theory. So you don't want to use Goleman's instrument and use Smith's theory, because they're not going to align. Smith may be looking at different components, or he may define it slightly different, which will have implications for the instrument. So that means the instrument may contain different things. So anyway, make sure your theory and your instrument match. You use Goleman's instrument, use Goleman's theory in your theoretical framework. Okay. Now the conceptual framework. Everything kind of holds for the conceptual framework as a theoretical framework, except that you're using it for a qualitative study and that you're using concepts instead of theories, right? It's right in the title. And the reason for that is quantitative studies tend to work deductively, right? So you're going to take a theory and then you're going to apply that theory to, or test it with a certain population or in a certain group or a certain setting. Okay, so you're taking a general theory and you're kind of overlaying it on that to see if, you know, it applies to what you're looking at specifically. Okay, deductively. Qualitative studies tend to be exploratory and they tend to work inductively. So in other words, you're going to, the data that you're going to get from interviewing people or something like that, focus groups, you kind of want the data to speak for itself, right? So you don't need a theory to overlay on top of it, right? Because that would kind of defeat the purpose. It would, you know, if you have a theoretical overlay, it would kind of get in the way of the data kind of speaking for itself. Because qualitative studies, you're usually looking for people's their experiences, you know, their perceptions, their lived, you know, how they see things, you know, their lived experiences, in-depth perceptions, right? And so once you get that data, you know, you analyze it and themes emerge, right? And you see what people are saying. So you get that kind of level of detail that you can then make conclusions from. So you don't want a theory kind of, you know, working against that data speaking for itself. So that's why you use concepts. And the concepts, you know, would be whatever you're studying. Let's just say you're studying, you know, challenges to career advancement for women in the university. or something like that. Then your concepts would be barriers and challenges to advancement, right? That would be your concept. You would pull it from the literature. Don't just use kind of your own definition of it. Pull the idea from the literature that is going to work for what you're doing, and really do the same thing in the theoretical framework. But again, you're using a major concept from the literature that you're studying instead of a theory. Okay, and real quick, let me post this. Okay, that is a link to a blog on the difference, which kind of backs up what I'm saying now, but it's more fleshed out. It's you can read it, but it's a blog on the differences between the conceptual framework and the theoretical framework. Okay, the review of the literature section comes next, and again, this is really the meat of the chapter, right? This is going to be 80% of the chapter, and this is where, yeah, you're reviewing, you're analyzing, summarizing to some extent, but there's more than just summary. The recent research or the research on your topic. Now, the real challenge here becomes organization, because you're going to have a lot of information, right? You can have a lot of articles, and you're like, okay, what the heck do I do with all these now? So the best thing to do is just, follow what you're studying, right? Again, if it's emotional intelligence and transformational leadership, then you're going to have a review of research on emotional intelligence, transformational leadership. Let's say it's, I don't know, what did I say before? Middle managers or something. Is more, the more you can kind of connect it to what you're doing specifically, the better. So you're going to have sections on, here's the recent research on middle management and transformational leadership. Here's the recent research on middle management and emotional intelligence, right? So whatever your variables are, you're going to need sections on those to review the literature that's been done on it. Same thing with qual study. Your major concepts will be subheaders, basically, right? And that's how you section the lit review portion of the literature review out by headers that correspond to what you're studying. Okay, and you review the literature on the on those topics. Now, once you have the headers, if you need subheaders within those to further organize the material, that's fine. Remember, this is going to be a lot of information. It's going to be not only reader friendly, but writer friendly if you section it out, or maybe make an outline. Again, base it on what you're studying, your variables, your major concepts. Have a section for each one that includes a review of the literature. That will help you as a writer, right, to compartmentalize things. If you just approach it as one big lump of data, of research material, it's going to stymie you. You're going to be paralyzed. So chunk it up into these sections, right? These headers based on what you're doing. That's also going to help your reader when your reader sits down to read it. Your professors, okay, here's a section on this. Here's a section on this. This makes sense. Yeah, you can't just do it in one big lump. It's not going to work. Okay. And let's see. So yeah, cover recent literature on your factors, your variables, your major concepts. Use headers, right? Okay, so reviewing research consists of synthesis and analysis. So yeah, what do we mean when we're reviewing these articles that we pulled? What does that mean? So it involves a couple of things. Synthesis, right? And that just means putting more than one thing together to form a whole. So what you're going to do is you're going to combine information from the studies to make your points. So you don't want to kind of go, talk about one study and then talk about another study and talk about another study. That's more like an annotated bibliography. This is more like you have a topic or you have a point, right? And I'll have an example here in a minute. And you pull different details from the studies to help make that point, right? And organization at the paragraph level also becomes important here, right? We all have to go back to middle school and to remember, how to write a good paragraph. And I'm not kind of being glib here. It's just, again, the chapter 2 is challenging. So any kind of organizational principles that you can use that help yourself and help your reader are going to be advantageous. And we all remember that, we have to have a topic sentence for a paragraph, evidence or discussion of the topic. And in this case, it will include material from the literature on the topic. It also includes noting where findings differ from and align with one another. And then we have a summary sentence at the end. Let's look at an example. Okay. So I have it color coded, and I'm not going to read the whole paragraph, but I'll just point out some things here. We have the topic sentence, right? Research has mostly shown that health literacy is an important factor in diabetic self-control and positive outcomes. So that's going to be your topic for this paragraph, right? So, and then the material in green is all the supporting material. And this is the specific material from the studies that supports that point, right? These researchers, Anders, here's what they found, right? Here's what these researchers, Gregory et al., here's what they found. That support what you're saying. There's another one here I want to bring your attention to. If you notice in the first sentence, it says research has mostly shown. Okay, that's a qualifying term, mostly. So that's going to mean that not all of it is shown. There's going to be one that didn't. If you get down near the end, it says, unlike Anders et al. And Gregory et al., Phillips et al. Found no statistically significant relationship between diabetes knowledge and glycemic control, which they attributed to a small sample size and possibly errors associated with self-reported instruments. So there's a little bit of analysis thrown in there, right? Here's one that didn't show that it was effective. Most of them did. However, there was one. And then the analysis is here, which they attributed to a small sample size and possibly errors associated with self-reported instruments. That helps explain possibly why these results were different than the other ones. And then so at the end, it's empirical evidence from recent research largely. Again, there's that qualifying word, meaning most of it does, but not all of it. Okay, so this is an example of synthesis with some analysis thrown in. You have the topic, you're bringing information from the studies into the paragraph to help support that topic, and getting some analysis where you can, meaning shortcomings or any opportunity you'd have to show that research is focused on some things, but not exactly what you're doing. Remember, anytime you can make a case for your study, that's a good idea in the lit review. Okay, analysis. This is the other part, and we kind of talked about it. That involves noting gaps or shortcomings in the research, right? Weaknesses, because those are things you can say that you're going to address. So note trends, note gaps in the research, reiterate the research problem and the need for your study where it's appropriate. So when you get a chance and you say, well, the study didn't focus on whatever it is you happen to be focusing on, then that gives you an opportunity to say, there's a need for a study on this. That's what your study is designed to do. Because again, the whole thing kind of culminates into an argument for conducting your study. So that's the analysis. So it's not just kind of summarizing. Summarizing is part of it. And it's not just synthesizing. Synthesizing is part of it. But it needs to have some, evaluative teeth to it, right? Some analytical teeth. And we're at the summary. And I know that was kind of quick. That's kind of a general coverage of the review of the literature portion. But again, they're all different. So they're all going to have, different headers, different ways to organize it based on what you're doing. but the idea and the moves that you're going to be making will be the same as far as, noting the gaps and the weaknesses, bringing the material together to make points. Okay, so for the summary, like other summaries, recap major points from the chapter. It's always good to remind the reader of the research problems based on what was in and what was not in the literature, right? Because it's part of what you're doing a literature review for, to show what's out there, but also what hasn't been covered, and hence why your study is needed. Right, and reiterate the need for your study. Okay. Here's information about who we are, how you can get in contact with us if you think you just want to talk to somebody to see if what we offer is suitable for you, is right for you. We do offer support on all the chapters and other things as well. Okay, and now I'll take questions. I know I had a couple already in here. Okay. Additional types of articles can be included as context and introduction. Yeah, by this I think you mean non-peer-reviewed articles. Yeah, non-peer-reviewed articles can be included for things like context and background information. Yeah, that's true. Pretty much though, your background material is largely going to be in chapter 1. But yeah, and sometimes schools do want, maybe Grand Canyon is one. I know some schools want a historical section, the lit review, which would focus on older material. But yeah, you can use non-peer-reviewed material for background and context, but I would use it sparingly, and I would use material that is reputable, something from like if you need statistics like .gov sites or .org sites. Okay, are we supposed to include opinion or stay objective? You mean when I'm probably talking about when you're analyzing the material. You can use your opinion, but it's going to be, it's not just going to be kind of opinion based on nothing, so if there's a weakness to the study that they've identified or that you see, provide evidence of the weakness. Don't just say, hey, I thought it was weak. If the weakness was they had a small sample size, well, that's you bringing it up, but it's also, you can point to it. So if there is a weakness, it's kind of a little bit of both. It's what you're perceiving as a weakness, but also you should have evidence to point to the weakness and how it's a weakness. But usually stay as objective or as academic or scholarly as possible. You offer tutoring, one-on-one tutoring. No, we do not. But you can ask, if you call and contact somebody for a consultation, they can tell you, explain everything that we do to you better than I can. Okay. Okay, here's another one. Oh, we do offer one-on-one assistance. Okay, well, that's why you got to the right person. So in terms of organization, do you need to justify why you have organized your review in a particular way, such as a construct-based chronological? No, you don't need to explain it, why you've organized it in a certain way. I mean, it should be evident, though, if you're going topic by topic, or if there's a reason to do it chronologically. I mean, you can say that if you want to. There's nothing that says you can't say, hey, here's why I structured it this way. I don't think you need to, but there's nothing to say that you can't explain it. And again, if it should be evident, and if it's not evident, you could say a few words about why you structured it the way you did. And synthesis. Okay, and I think that was responding to something I had talked about earlier in synthesis. You mean, can there be opinion in synthesis? Yeah, usually not, because you're pulling material from the studies, right? And again, if there's something that you need to point to that's different or odd, I mean, you can go ahead and point to it, and that would be to some degree your opinion. But the lit review, like the whole study, should remain as it should remain pretty objective and scholarly in tone. Okay, what is the rationale for not referencing books on the subject or minimal references? Books, because books are not, you can reference books. It's okay to kind of cite books here and there. But number one, books are not peer reviewed, or if they are, it's unclear whether they're peer reviewed. And, you know, when you're reviewing material, to review a book in its entirety, you know, that's a lot different than reviewing a study, right? And just pulling the details out of a study. Hey, here's what the purpose of the study was. Here's who the participants were. Here's how they analyzed the data. Here's what they found. You know, but for a book, it's hard to kind of cover all that territory. Now, that's not to say you can't, you know, bring book material in. But I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it a lot. I mean, I would do it sparingly. I mean, that's my rationale. Are you going to share slides with us? I believe they're going to be shared with you. Yep. Okay. Yep. It's in there. Right. Okay. Any other questions? And how long is the lit review? I didn't get that question. Again, check your template to see what it says. People hear me? Okay. Check your template to see what it says. You know, I've seen 10-page lit reviews. I've seen 80-page lit reviews. Yeah. Usually the sweet spot is about 25 to 30 pages. Again, see what your school says. And it's, you know, it's a little tough. The lit review is tough. One of the tougher chapters, but you know, it can be done. People do it. Use your resources. Get a good example. You know, talk to your chair, work with your chair, and you know, if you think you need help beyond that, you can talk to one of our consultants. Okay. Any other questions? Well, great, everybody. Thank you for attending. And we do offer other webinars on other chapters and other topics involved in the dissertation. So check in with us again. Thank you, everybody. All right.